Welcome to the spagirlspodcast, the self-publishing podcast for authors. You're in the right place for the best writing, marketing, and publishing advice, plus interviews with industry experts and best-selling authors. I'm Cheryl Phipps.
I'm Wendy Vella.
And I'm Trudy J. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello. This week we have an amazing guest. I'm really excited about it. We
Me
have
too.
Maggie Marr, who is I don't know, would we call you an entertainment lawyer? Is that a correct terminology?
That works. Yeah.
Yes,
That sounds pretty cool.
That
Yeah.
sounds fancy.
Yeah.
Or creatives law. You're a lawyer. Okay, I'll
Yeah,
We'll
try
go
to
with that. We'll go
just
with that.
Yeah.
say
Plus
what
an
I-
author. Yeah.
A plus an author of lots of books. So
Yeah.
I'm going to really quickly read out your bio so everyone knows how awesome you are, Maggie. And then we are going to get into the questions. So Maggie Marr is the founder of Maggie Marr Legal PC and a USA Today best-selling author of over 20 books. Maggie is also a former ICM motion picture literary and subsidiary rights agent, try saying that, as well as the co-founder and legal advisor to the not-for-profit Women's Fiction Writers Association and a member of Women in Film. Maggie Marr Legal has negotiated deals with Netflix, HBO, Amazon Prime, Universal, Warner Brothers, Disney, and others. The firm also provides services such as entertainment and publishing representation, trademark and copyright, packaging and sales, business legal affairs and corporate, production and distribution legal.
Wow.
So there you go.
You're
so
a
that
busy
sounds
woman.
very fancy.
How good
I
are
don't
you?
Yeah.
Sounds like a lot when you read it.
We clearly need to work harder.
Yeah, clearly. I don't know what half of that means, so I want you to break that down. But before we do that, can you how did you get into this kind of work? Like, how did you become
Tell us your journey.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's never what you think it's going to be, right?
No.
Yeah. So I grew up in the middle of the United States, and I was really good with words. And so my parents thought I should go to law school because we didn't know any authors or writers. Yeah. So, and if you're good with math and science, you go to medical school. So I went to law school, and I really thought that I would live in the middle of the country and be a prosecutor my whole life. But my husband was an actor, so we moved to LA.
Wow.
So,
Oh,
yeah, so I had already been an attorney. And when we moved to Los Angeles, I started in the mailroom at ICM, pushing the mail cart, and eventually worked my way up. It's true, everyone starts in the mailroom, and worked my way up agent. And while I was there as an agent in my spare time, because I didn't have kids yet, when I couldn't sleep or something, I would write stories, right? So I'd been working on this story, and then I had my first daughter, and she was about 2. And my husband said to me, if you tried to sell this book you've been working on for forever, we could pay for preschool. And I said, no, I'm an agent now. That's not what I'm going to do. He goes, well, you could try, because baby agents don't make a lot of money. So I slipped it to a friend of mine without my name on it, who worked in the publishing arm of ICM. And she called me up and she was like, who wrote this? And I said, do you really want to know? And she goes, oh my God, you wrote this. I said, yeah, I did. She said, I can sell it. And I said, okay. So she took it out and she sold it. And it was a 2-book deal. It was an auction at Random House, right? Which doesn't really happen very much. And she sold the heck out of it. And so I decided I would stay, right? But I discovered that writing the second book in that 2-book auction was much different than just writing when on deadline, than when just writing for fun. So I decided to go, and I was going to write full time. But as I was saying, my friends determined that I had an entertainment law background and that I had worked in film and TV. And so a lot of my writer friends and some of my former clients from ICM would ask me to read their stuff, negotiate their deals, look at the contracts. And so the law firm just organically grew over time through word of mouth. It was all word of mouth. And it was my husband who about 3 or 4 years in said to me, if you're negotiating deals and looking at contracts 5 or 6 hours a day and you're writing 2 or 3 hours a day, you have an entertainment law firm. And he was right.
Wow.
So a full-time job.
Yeah, with the kids too, right? As we all know. So it was really organic. And I feel like I'm so lucky because I sit in this really beautiful spot of understanding publishing, having worked in that area, understanding film and TV because of the background as an agent in film and TV. And then also from the perspective of being a writer as well, I tend to be really protective of all authors, but independent authors' rights, because I understand what that means when you're conveying your rights to someone. So
Exactly.
I love that. I love the fact that you're an author as well. It kind of gives you
It's
that
sort of
special
all-
knowledge of
so much
understanding and empathy.
And the communication. I don't know if you experienced this, but when I started to really lean into this thing of being a writer, I felt like I had met my people. Right. Like there was this ability to sit in a room, and if you talked about the voice you were hearing in your head that wouldn't leave you alone, nobody looked at you and thought you need to be medicated.
But that's the truth. We all, I think every one of us have been to a writers' meeting and walked into our writers' meeting and gone, wow, these are my people. I can remember doing that.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
It is lovely.
And I don't take that lightly. I'm in a lot of writers groups on different social media platforms, and things will pop up for legal stuff, and I try not to raise my hand. I don't, because I don't want anyone to pull my writer's card. Right. I figure if people need help, they'll find their way to me, but I don't want to be the person who's like waving their arms and saying,
So you can.
Well, the reason we actually have Maggie on here was because she negotiated a contract for me with Dragonblade.
Well done. Congratulations.
Well done, Wendy.
So for me, it was a case of, it was so out of my wheelhouse. I'd had a traditional contract before, but I was very new and I just went with whatever they said. And then now at this stage in my career, I was like, oh, you really need someone to look at this to make sure that it's right. And that's a lot of people recommended Maggie. So I went to her and she was amazing. And it meant that I didn't have to fret over all of the really tough wording in the contract.
I was just going to say, know exactly what it meant.
So that's why I thought Maggie coming on was, a no-brainer for a lot of people who are in my position who just have no clue where to go.
Is that something that you get a lot of? Like, do people come to you saying, I've got this contract and I don't know whether I should sign it? Is that the...
So, and I think it depends on where the author is in their career, but absolutely. I think there are two things. One of them is that I am a high-end translator of legal language, right? So, and then the second thing is I've heard this from a multitude of my clients. I believe writers are the smartest people in the room, right? But for writers, there wouldn't be films, TV, books, any of it. I know that. And I think most writers that I work with know that I know that. So I've heard over and over again, I never feel silly asking you a question. I never feel like you're going to think, well, that's ridiculous. Why would you ask that? Because why wouldn't you? These are your rates to your work, Absolutely.
And it's so far outside your wheelhouse too, you're a writer. So when the contract came on my desk, I looked at it and I was like, I'm absolutely clueless. And there's no one around me that knows anything about any of that. I've got one friend who's a lawyer and she doesn't deal with that sort of thing. So it was comforting to me to be able to hand that to you and go,
Oh, thank you. I'm grateful for that. I'll take it. Thank you.
No, it was awesome.
So let's talk through it a little bit. So what's the first thing we should do when we get a contract from either traditional publishing house like Wendy or I don't know, Netflix or whatever? Like, should we just sign on the dotted line, or do we?
Please don't. And I always say it doesn't have to be me, but find someone who understands those agreements to take a look at them. So it's been my experience that every corporate entity will present you with an agreement that is in the best interest of that corporate entity, right? It's incumbent upon us as creatives to review it and try to make that agreement that is as favorable as possible to the person who created the intellectual property, the writer, the creator, which includes even negotiating royalties, percentages, unless you've already closed on those numbers, the length of term, things like that. I've had some clients, and I think everyone is like this. You spend so much time trying to get people to read your work that when somebody wants it, it's almost like a fear that if you ask for what you need in the agreement, they'll just say, go kick rocks and won't want your work. It's been my experience that 99.9% of all corporate entities are willing to negotiate. They're not always willing to give you everything you want. And they may come back and say, we can only move on these few things. But if you get some movement, it's still a better contract than the one that was presented to you.
Yeah. And that's sort of, we're scared almost, aren't we, to push back because we think they're going to whip it away from us and go, no, well, you don't want this, you know?
Yeah. And the other thing I've often said, to the chagrin of some agents, on top of, wanting to push back against a corporate contract, the other thing is that writers are the boss. Like, you employ your agent, you employ your attorney, right? Like, you are the one who gets to tell those people, but your reps, how you want it to be, or if something's acceptable. And I think that's really empowering, and yet a little bit fear-inducing maybe at the beginning.
Yeah, it really is.
It's kind of like we sometimes think about lawyers like the doctor, where you go in and you just have to do everything they tell you to do. And reminding yourself that actually you're still in charge is kind of nice. But also, whilst you are the legal person who is translating for us, you know what you're doing too.
I think as writers though, right, we're sort of quite introverted. We're not we're strong, but we're not sort of quite forceful, and I think that it's tough to be forceful.
Well, because we're all suffering from imposter syndrome, aren't we? We're all thinking that we're not as good as, perhaps,
That's the truth too.
Maybe we're not worth that extra zero or whatever.
So what are some of the main things that we should, like, in a contract that you see that are often either sticking points or problems and that are commonly common in contracts?
So some of the top sort of 3 or 4 things that I always look for is I want to look at the grant language. And by grant language, an example is that, for a while I was seeing a lot of smaller companies, say out of the Pacific Rim, seeking rights so that they could put things up maybe on their website or the social media, things like that, or had their own sort of apps. And those smaller companies, in their grant of rights clauses, were grabbing everything. So I think you want to make sure that the rights that you're licensing to the entity, they're not too much. It used to be a line in the sand that traditional publishers would never ask for film and TV rights. And we've seen that line sort of shift forward. It's my position that unless you're dealing with an entity that's had success in converting those film and TV rights into a film or TV show, then don't convey them, right? Unless you're conveying them to a Netflix or a Max or HBO Max or an Amazon Prime. That makes sense. So I think you want to see the grant language. The other one is the term of the agreement. Is it for life of copyright? If it's for life of copyright, then your reversion language is going to become really important, because that's going to determine when that book is going to come home for you. And the reversion language is also dependent on the definition of out of print, which varies from publisher to publisher. I think myself, as well as most authors, prefer a term limited agreement, which we still see out of Europe, but American publishers often want life of copyright. So then we have to drill down into the reversion language. Term can be 10, 7, 5 years, if you can get it. What else? So then obviously the royalties. What are your royalties going to be like? Do you have escalators as to royalties? Is there a bonus structure? Like if you hit a list somehow, then there are all the other sort of rights that you're conveying. Are you conveying worldwide rights, or are you just going to do North American and retain some of those rights yourselves? The other things I want to look at is if they have an option for your next book, and if so, what does that look like, and when is it completed? I prefer a right of first negotiation, meaning that the publisher can have the right to look at the first book and enter into negotiations, but you're not obligated as the author to say yes. The non-compete language can be highly negotiated anymore because indie authors have such robust publishing schedules, and traditional publishers still want to carve out time. I think indie authors know that books by a beloved author actually elevate the sales. I believe that some traditional publishers are still concerned that if an indie author comes out with an independently published book around the same time, that it will cannibalize their sales. I don't think that's true, but I think traditional publishing is still worried about that.
Yeah.
So I've seen some traditional publishers saying, we want to carve out of 12 months before and 12 months after. Well, as an indie author, how much that's going to eat up your business.
Yeah.
So I think 90 days before and 90 days after is pretty reasonable, because there are a lot of indie authors that are doing a book a month. It's usually, a book every other month or something like that. Advance, obviously, what is your advance like? Can you get it higher? Things like that.
Yeah. So lots of different things. And so one thing that Wendy wanted to know about, which I'm going to ask on her.
Yeah.
So what is force majeure? Like, what does that mean?
Force majeure. It means if there's a war, another pandemic, if there's a civil war after the US election. No.
She went there. We never go there.
But you know what I mean? Like those things that you can't really control. An earthquake, a tsunami, something like that. Yeah.
And is that on behalf of the publisher or the author?
It depends.
Both.
It can be negotiated. Yeah. So, and we see it in film and TV deals too. So every publisher is different as to how their force majeure, how long it will be. Oftentimes we'll try to limit it to 90 days or 30 days, meaning that if it exceeds that amount of time, then you can maybe negate the agreement. I can say that, we used it a lot we had a writer's strike and a strike last summer, and you saw the force majeure language coming into play. And then you also saw people who maybe didn't have the force majeure language in their agreements, but they would reach out and they would say, hey, we had an option on this book that it expired, but because of the writer's strike, would your client consider giving us a little bit of time? I can tell you that the majority of my clients said yes to that, because it was this sort of reasonability. I'd like to believe still that if people are communicating and behaving reasonably, they don't always have to go back to the agreement and point to the line that says, this is what you have to do. It's nice to have it as a backup in case that breaks down.
Yeah, fair enough. That's true.
Yeah.
So did you talk about royalties? So how do you negotiate them, and what's a good percentage? Like, how do we incorporate that kind of thing?
You're going to make me talk about numbers, and that's why I didn't become an accountant. I want to so it really is dependent. I can tell you, so I'm trying to think. So I think that it's like 7.5 to 10 with escalators for paperback and hardcover. It's usually in that range somewhere. I can tell you with ebook, I mean, I still don't believe that I've not yet seen a trad deal that's going to make up for what a successful indie author is going to make an ebook, right? I've seen them as low as 20% and as high as 50%. Now, the 50% I think was not with traditional. It was more like a hybrid sort of publishing entity. And then audio is the same. It's in that range. Foreign rights, I still love it when an author's able to retain their foreign rights so that they can sell those off individually, because I think they're probably going to get a better deal on that. Now, keep in mind, and this is the thing that's interesting, is that it has to do with the moving pieces. So let me give you an example. I have a client who is an indie author, and she's got a successful business, but she decided that she wanted to try specifically to hit a list, right? So she has sold or licensed to a publisher for seven figures, a 3-book series that she knows is never going to come home to her. And she also conveyed ebook and audio, and those percentages were not as fantastic as they could be, nor will it be the amount of money that she probably would have made for those books by herself, but it was 7 figures that she will get over the next year and a half. Plus, she will be within the strike zone for the Times because that's so highly curated. And on top of that, she wants to then take that out in film and TV. And so she started those conversations. So all of those things were very strategic, right?
Yeah.
And so it made sense for that deal to agree to those things. So as far as it not maybe being the very best with regards to ebook and audio, because she knew that there were a lot of these other outlier elements that she was trying to pull the trigger on. Yeah.
That makes
I'm
sense.
sorry. I feel like I got off.
No, it makes
No,
very
I
perfect
think,
sense. That's
I think
brilliant.
that's great.
That's good
Yeah.
because it's kind of
Yeah.
that whole thing. The other, and I don't know if this is still a thing or if it ever was a thing, but I always heard that. So, for example, when you're in traditional publishing and you're negotiating the advance, that often the advance you're never going to actually be
Earn it
earning the
out.
royalty amounts anyway. That the advance you kind of want it to be big enough to kind of satisfy you for what you want to earn for that book,
I
because it's
believe
probably
that.
yeah.
I believe you want to try to push as hard as you can and get as much money into the author's pocket as possible, as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because the royalties, that makes sense. Okay,
And
so
it's not easy to get the rights back. I mean, they say that it's a certain period, don't they? But like I've been battling to get mine back for my first book for quite like 4 years.
And you know, it really depends. I mean, I cannot tell you. So you can have a book that you have not triggered your reversion language, but if you reach out to a publisher, occasionally they'll say, "Oh yeah, we'll give you those rights back." And then you can have a book that is maybe just 2 sales away from triggering your reversion language, and they'll say, "No way, not." And it could be the same publisher, right? Like, so it's hard to understand what goes on behind the scenes as far as why they will give rights back and why they won't. So
it's kind of ironic for Wendy's one, because Wendy makes so much more and is so much more popular for all of her indie stuff. It's almost like they were holding on to the contract for her one because they were kind of trying to ride off the back of Wendy's personal success rather than anything that they'd managed to do with her book in the traditional sphere. So it was quite interesting.
But I got it now. So
you got it back.
Oh, that's great.
And
Congratulations.
it's so frustrating as an indie author, isn't it? When you see, it's like you see it languishing there and you know what you need to do to get those sales up. And you could even speak to your editor there and nobody responds, and it's so frustrating.
And they're like, "Oh no, that's not me. I'm going to pass you on to someone else." And you know.
And I think that's the hardest part for a lot of indie authors.
And looking at that cover that could be so much better, and the blurb,
and looking at that book that you wrote, the first one you wrote, and you think, "Oh, please don't anyone read that."
I gotta say, nobody knows their own audience like a successful indie author. And it used to be, I think, that people thought that there was some sort of secret sauce with traditional publishers and that they would be able to promote or market in a way that authors couldn't. And it's been my experience that if you have a successful indie author, the publisher will turn to you and say, "Hey, what do you think we should do?" You know, because you know your audience better than anyone else.
That's so interesting.
So
the next question was around termination and reversion of rights, and we've talked about it a little bit. Is there anything else that we need to know or should know around? It's kind of shocking to me that they're getting in the contract the rights for the life of the copyright. That seems a lot, but that's common now, you're saying?
It seems like a lot. I can tell you that most of the trad deals that we see, especially out of North America, they'll be requesting it. We don't get a lot. It's not a lot of term deals that we get for North America or for the US specifically, always request it. And then we look at the reversion language to see what kind of thresholds we're going to have to meet. You know, sometimes they'll say you cannot. If you sell over $500 in 2 accounting periods, then you cannot revert. It has to be less than that. And we all know as indie authors that you can mess around with that and get that amount of sales, right? Like you could do a book bub for $2 and or $1 and be able to probably hit that. And that, so as far as reversion, this is what I would say. So as an as an author, even if you had conveyed for life of copyright, if you would cut and paste into some sort of document that shows how your reverted rights are going to be triggered. And then when you get to a phase when you're getting those royalty statements that really aren't showing much of anything, maybe you make it a habit to just start requesting your rights back, right? And there are some limitations too in the reversion language that says you can only request it on the full moon of an equinox. No, I'm kidding. But what it feels like it feels like you have to jump through all these hoops. But it'll say you can only request it like once every 2 quarters or something like that. So it would be my advice that if you want that book to come home to you, see what those limitations are. And even if you haven't quite hit the numbers, to keep asking.
Start the process. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Because
what about marketing? Is it important to discuss marketing before you sign anything, or?
I think it's really important to discuss it with the editor that's going to be your acquiring editor. I have had little to no, very little success in getting marketing and promotions actually dropped into agreements. It's really hard to get them to agree to that. And when you do, it's a win for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you I mean, I know as an indie author, I'd be like wanting to go and do my own marketing and promotion. Does that still happen when you have a trad deal? Can you go out there and book your own stuff? Or you're kind of tied into?
Yes. In fact, I think I'm so sorry. I have a German Shepherd that is scratching on my door. I have
Can't hear it. Don't worry.
Can't hear. No.
I've got to let her out or she will have a fit.
Go
1
for
second.
it.
I apologize in advance. Oh my goodness.
That's hilarious. Maggie's just zapped away to let her German Shepherd out. It's very interesting to me that what we don't know. Do you know what I mean? I think we come into this as so inexperienced. And
it's
for
so
me,
important, right?
It is so important, but we just sort of like, oh, well, they know what they're doing, right? There's the contract. And I was like with my first one, I was so excited to get it. It was the first book I was going to have published. I'd always wanted to be
take it all,
published.
take everything.
I never even, I didn't do anything, you know, like I was like, here you go, take it, you know, and it wasn't until now where however many books later, and I am having some success that I realize in actual fact what I gave away back then.
You're not alone. Don't beat yourself up too much. I have had lots of clients who have said to me, I'm going to take this deal no matter what. And I'll say, okay, well, and then my goal is to just make sure that everybody knows what they're walking into. So I'll send the email and I'll say, these are the things that I think are challenging about this agreement. These are the things I'd like to try to change. And then, you know, but it is up to every author to determine what's going to work for them. So you're not alone, Wendy. A lot of people want that first deal really badly.
It's just language we don't know too. You know, like it's foreign, so it actually becomes too much, and you're reading through it and you're going, I have no clue about this. So
it's funny how it's foreign. I think we all speak the language, but we really don't.
Let me write my box. I don't want that.
Right?
Before you ran away, you were just going to talk about the marketing. So doing your own marketing in terms of.
So I think that one of the frustrating things with doing marketing as an indie author who takes a trad deal is that you can't see the dashboard, right? Like you can't see if what you're doing has an impact, right? Whereas if you're an indie author and you're tweaking your Amazon keywords, or you're tweaking your Facebook ads, or you're like going out with a newsletter, you have the immediacy of, oh, I see, I think I know where that's linked to, right? And you don't have that, because not only will you not have the immediacy of your numbers, but you may not see your numbers for an entire royalty period. And then the other thing is that if you're going to be the person doing some advertising for your trad book, then that eats away at the amount of money that you're going to get from your royalties. Although I would argue that Amazon has done a pretty great job of recouping some of the money that it gives to independent authors because of the advertising that independent authors do through Amazon, you know? But yeah, I think anymore, even with a unless you get a big splashy trad deal, if it's more of a standard sort of deal, you know, with the advance or a limited advance, like it's not high 6 or 7 figures, you are going to be in a lot of ways the person who's marketing. And the other thing I've seen is that a lot of trad publishers, and when I say trad, I mean even like Lake Union, Montlake, and Thomas Mercer, they come for authors that they know have an established audience. And it's because they lean into that relationship that the author has, and that they know how to market.
Yeah, that's so funny. It's so different to what it was like when we first had indie, and it was like, if you go indie, you'll never get a trad deal. And now they're looking to you having an audience in indie in that world. Yeah, it's funny. Okay, what about if you can't meet the obligations of the contract? What if you can't finish your book in time?
Which part of the obligation? You mean maybe you're not going to turn your book in on time?
Yeah,
That's what.
Okay. So it's interesting in practice versus what it says. So it's been my experience that so if an author, say you were supposed to turn a book in January 1st, right? And you fall down and you have to have hip surgery or whatever, and you're going to be behind. It's been my experience that most editors are more than willing to be reasonable about those things as long as you're being communicative, right? So if you say I had an accident, blah, blah, sometimes they will push the pub date. They'll still want the book. But if you had a situation where, say, you decided that you just did not want to be in a relationship with the traditional, it was you who decided that. Most likely you're probably going to be on the hook for your advance, right? So, but they may have something in the agreement, or they may agree to that. Okay, so you don't want to be in business with us anymore, and we paid you $1 million for this book. We want our $1 million back, but we will agree to let you try to find another publisher who's going to pay you that advance, and then that advance can come to us from whatever advance you secure from them. Right. Now, if it's a book where you turn it in and you've done everything, I just had this happen. So you've turned it in and you've done everything that you possibly can. And say your editor leaves and you've got a new editor, you're kind of a orphaned book, and that editor just doesn't love the book and she wants to cut the book loose. Oftentimes, if the publisher decides to cut the book loose, then you're not going to have to repay any part of your advance, and all those rights are going to come back to you, especially if you've acted in good faith during the entire time and tried to fulfill what you need to fulfill.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it depends where that comes from. That makes sense. I mean, I guess that's kind of like any contract, right? Like that's not so hard to understand.
And with the caveat that anything could be different, you know?
That's right.
Very rep out of New York, and he had worked in publishing for a really long time. And he said to me, because he had worked for a publishing house too, he said to me, don't ever believe them when they say we can't do that. Because I think one of his internships was to look through old contracts or something. He's like, they've been in business for almost 200 years now. And at some point, someone has gotten that in a contract. Right?
Yeah.
So it's good to always ask for what you want, especially with trad.
Are trad deals still a big thing? Is there still plenty of trad deals going on?
I feel as though it has shifted enormously. My first trad deal was in like 2006. And I feel like publishing years are like dog years. So I'm like 150 years old in publishing. And so it changed a lot, right? Like you could see it. Romance authors always lead the way. They do. They lead the way on everything in publishing. So I feel like as far as romance is concerned, you have most likely you're an author who has already been established if you're going to get a deal, you know, except for some of the trad houses that always are in romance, right? But if you want a big splashy deal, you're bringing the idea, you're bringing a lot of your readership. They think that it's going to be lucrative for them. As far as YA, there's still a lot of trad deals. Nonfiction, there's always going to be trad deals. I think thrillers, there's still trad deals. Although if you look at the Amazon top 10 on any given day, I would say that the majority is independent authors.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
wow.
That leads me to the other side of what you do. So that's kind of the trad deals, the contracts and things like that. What about getting books into film and TV. So you've got a book on that conveniently for all of us to read. But could you tell us a little bit how that works? Like, do people come to you with the offer, or are you,
both? I think both. So a lot of people find their way to me when they, I think it happens very similar to what happened to you, Wendy, is that they reach out to someone and they say, oh my goodness, this producer wants to option my work and I don't know what I should do. And they'll say, oh, reach out to Maggie. So, so I get clients that way, where somebody has already said, I'm interested in your work. And then people reach out to me and they'll say, would you be willing to try to set up my book with a production company or with a studio or a streamer, which I will do. Here's the thing. I was an agent and I did that full time. And I'm not a collector of materials, right? So what I will say to the author who comes to me, who wants me to try to set up their work, I will say, let me read it first. If I think I know who the studio, streamer, or producer is for the project, I am more than happy to submit it and see if we can find a home for it. But if I don't have that relationship, I don't want to just hold on to your material, because that's the worst thing in the world, right? Like, as an author, if you think that someone is out there pitching your work and they're not, now, that being said, sometimes this happened to me, I'll read more than once. I will read something and I'll say to the author, I don't know who the buyer is for this. I haven't met them. And then 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 4 months later, I'll be talking to a producer and they'll say, I've always wanted to do a project on X. And I'll say, funny enough, I read a book about X. And then I'll reach out to the author and say, hey, are your film and TV rights still available? If they are, can I give it to this producer and see if we can find a home for it?
Right.
So that happens, and then so it all feels very organic, and I like it that way.
Yeah, that sounds cool. That's awesome.
It's great that you have that sort of intuition for a book and stuff like that, rather than just taking them on board and keeping them, because we've all heard about authors, right, who've had their rights bought up for things and nothing eventuates.
Well, and the thing is that, so think of how many books get published a year, and it's a small number that get optioned or put under an option shopping agreement, and then it's an even smaller number that actually get made, right?
Exactly.
And that's another thing. If you are presented with an option agreement or a shopping agreement or attachment agreement for film and TV, it doesn't have to be me, but have someone look at it, because I have seen some pretty not so great deals from producers that I did not like what they did to with regards to the underlying work.
And I mean, that's the point always, is that the person presenting you with this offer or the contract or whatever is always going to be doing it to their own best interest. They're not generally going to be going, oh, well, this is in the author's best interest, I'm going to make sure that they're okay. Are they? So
I think so. There are really good people out there that I think are collaborative, but I don't know if you know who those are automatically.
Exactly. There's a lot of sharks as well, right, swimming in that water. Unfortunately.
Although apparently sharks are not as bad as we make them out to be.
No, they get a bad rap as well.
And we should not be mean about the sharks.
Living surrounded by them, we know, right?
So some of the other things that you mentioned that you work on in the bio that I read out earlier. So you talk about packaging and sales. So what does that even mean? I don't even, what do you do?
Yeah, so packaging sales has a lot to do with a film and TV, right? So it's about finding the right producer or finding the right writer or showrunner who can come onto the book and then go out to different studios or streamers and try to pitch the book, or finding the right actor, finding the right director. So we do try sometimes to package up materials and present them to producers that way. And sales is basically the selling of the film and TV rights to the book. And then there have been a few times where we have been the sales agent for an already completed film, looking for a distribution for that project.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Okay.
Are they the films that have been made from books, or is that just because you've got connections and you kind of ended up?
No, the one, it's so funny that you asked that. I never thought of it, but the independent films that we have been able to be sales agents on have not been from books. They've been from scripts, and then they've been like smaller productions that people have been able to put together.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Is your husband still acting, out of curiosity?
No, he's a restaurateur. So he
Handy.
owns a restaurant now. He owns a
Yeah.
restaurant
Oh, that's
now.
awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's funny that he got you into it and then
he's out of it.
business, but you're still.
Yeah.
I know.
So a little question for people that are just sort of, how do they go about getting good legal advice besides you, obviously, for contracts, vetting someone, getting an expert in the field? This was a question we got through on our Facebook page. What's the best way for them to look at getting some to represent them? Because obviously not everyone can use you. Is there a place you can go, or what a site, or what?
So I think the U.S. Authors Guild is great to be helpful, right? I love them. There's the Alliance of Independent Authors, I think is what it's called. That's another place that I think is a great resource.
Okay.
And then word of mouth. I mean, I got to tell you, especially with romance authors, have you ever met a group that is more helpful than telling you who to steer clear of and who is going to do a good job, right? Like, or whether it be cover designers, editors, whoever it is, right? Like they are the absolute best. And I think that they're very truthful,
Yeah.
So,
okay. That's cool to know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's good.
And one of the other questions we actually got was about AI, because that's become a big thing now.
Yeah.
What's your overall view on AI?
So I have to tell you, I was at a big conference, I think it was the end of last year, and I looked around the room and I thought to myself, are we still going to be having these? Right? Like, is it gonna like swamp everybody? So there's a couple things. So one of them is that I've been saying to all of my friends and clients that I think one of the ways to right now to get around AI is that I think that as we start to have more and more AI, we're going to be seeking more and more of a human connection, because I believe it's inevitable that AI is going to be doing a lot of things for us that we may not even be aware of. But that being said, if you have a human connection to your readership, I believe that even if there's thousands of AI books on the marketplace, when you, the author that they love, comes out with a book, they will still one-click it and read it. I've been suggesting to my friends and clients that when you send a newsletter, send like a video clip of yourself, right? Or make it as personal as possible. Maybe lean into small personal appearances. When you visit a city, say to your readers, I'm going to be here. Anyone want to meet for coffee? Things like that. Because I think we're going to continue and even crave even more that personal connection. And as we know, one of the reasons I think romance authors are so helpful to each other is that a lot of times you can't fulfill your readers' needs. There are romance readers that read a book a day, right? And there's no author that I've met yet that's human that could fulfill that. So right, we're often very happy to say to our readership, oh, if you want someone who writes like this person, maybe try this book too. As far as contractual is with regards to AI, I've been trying to push language because it's one of those areas that's still kind of the wild, wild west. In most agreements, most of the language is fairly solidified and you know where you can move and tweak things so that they'll benefit the author. But AI is one of those areas that is not quite there yet. So there's a difference. There's a difference between generative AI and like AI that we all use for spell check, So one of the things that I've been leaning into, and I've seen contract language leaning into, is that they will state that they will not use generative AI with regards to the edit or the cover or the graphic design. And I think that that's much like what we went through with the writer's strike here is in the actor strike, is that you don't want to use generative AI, but people still want to be able to use spell check. They still want to be able to use Grammarly, I think is, some authors use Grammarly to check, and that's AI. So I think being very specific in trying to get, no, you cannot use generative AI. And then with independent authors, it is also a business model thing. Like I just had a conversation the other day with a client where I think it was an audiobook agreement. And I said, well, this company uses AI for their narration. And the writer was like, I don't care. And I said, okay, because there are some authors that are like, no way, no how, do not
Yeah.
want audio narration that is AI based. So everyone is different as to how they're going to confront this, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got to just work
Did I
out what
answer
suits you. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's work out what
Yeah.
suits you, right? Because there's
Yeah.
covers, there's everything now.
It's
isn't
it's
it?
having knowledge, isn't it? It's understanding what
Yeah.
you're giving
Right?
away or opting
Yeah.
to use. Yeah.
Mm.
And the other thing is that if you, right now in the US at least, if you generate an AI manuscript, you can't get copyright on that.
Right. Okay.
You know,
Okay.
if you're being
Interesting.
honest when you apply for copyright, it asks you, and you're not supposed to be able to get a copyright. And I think that I can't imagine, well, yet, I should always say, but that's one of those sort of warranties and indemnities that when you're conveying a book to a trad publisher, or when you're conveying rights to film and TV, that you're warranting that you were the person that actually wrote it.
Yeah.
So if somebody were to find out that you didn't and it was AI, it could be a huge,
Yeah.
which my legal mind goes to, will inevitably happen at
Yes.
some
Yes.
point, right?
Yeah. I was
Well,
just thinking the
we'll
very
see
thing.
it.
That'll
It'll
be
be,
another drama in the indie world. Yeah.
yeah, it'll be really interesting
Yeah.
and painful to watch, but
Mhm.
yeah.
So that's interesting because you one of the other things you do is trademark and copyright, and you have to, in the States, like in New Zealand, we kind of have automatic copyright, as we don't have to apply for it. So in the States, you have to apply for it through the systems. Is that right? How does copyright
Well,
work?
you get copyright automatically as an author
Mhm.
in the
Yeah.
US. You have your copyright, but if you proactively file for copyright with the Copyright Office, then you get some benefits.
Okay.
The burden of proof shifts to the infringer, right? Like you don't have to prove as the copyright holder that you wrote the book. They have to prove that you didn't, or that they actually wrote it. So that's the first thing. And then the statutory damages. There's a statutory damages clause that comes into play if you have proactively filed for copyright, which can be helpful. I don't litigate anymore. I used to be a litigator when I was young. I don't do it. I'm all transactional now. So, but if you need to get into a litigation situation to protect your copyright, the statutory damages can help you find a litigator who's willing to take that risk, because litigation's expensive, right?
Okay.
And here's the thing about copyright. Anyone who's smart enough to write a book can file for copyright in the US. It's not tricky. It's just it's a government website, so it may take a little bit of like thinking about it or working with it, but once you've done it once, you can absolutely do it. And that's the first thing I say to someone who comes to me for copyright. I'm like, you can do this. And I have some clients who are just like, nope, don't want to. Maggie, you do it. Send me the bill. And then I have some clients who are like, oh, I can't. I'm like, yes, and go try. And if you have problems, let me know. Because I mean, like I said, everybody's business model is different. Some
Can
people,
we apply for copyright as New Zealanders outside of the States? Yeah.
you absolutely can.
Yeah.
Trademark is a little bit different because trademark. So when we file for trademark, we do all of these things I do as the attorney representing my client. And then once we actually file and we put all of the documents into the USPTO, they assign an examining attorney on their side, who is an examining attorney for the USPTO. And then they do all of their research on their side. So while I do believe you could file for trademark on your own, there's still a part of me that thinks that it is a benefit to have an attorney do it for you. If you're outside of the country and you want a US trademark, then you do have to use an attorney. It could be anywhere in the United States, but you do have to use an attorney to file for trademark from outside the US. Inside the US, you do not have to use one.
So what
I
kind of
think it
things?
really depends on the comfort level.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
kinds of things can you apply for trademark? Like it's not titles. I know that. I remember.
So, like 5 years ago, I would have said to authors, don't even worry about it. But now, because of a couple things, one of them is that you've got authors now who have pen names that are making them huge amounts of money. And that, in my mind, becomes a brand asset. And you want to protect that brand asset. And it ties in with the next point, in that if you see something pop up under your pen name that's is lucrative or is yours, and it's not yours, if you have your trademark registration in hand, you can send that to the distributor and say, hey, I don't know who that is, and it will be down very fast, right?
Okay.
Have to fight
Mhm.
it. So it's a little bit of insurance. So you can trademark pin names. You can even trademark your own name if it is out in the marketplace and known specifically for doing business, right? Like Kate Spade, perfect example. That was a legal name and it was trademarked. Nancy Drew is trademarked. Marie Force is trademarked. So you can trademark a legal name. You can trademark a pin name. And you can also trademark a series name. You can't trademark an individual book name. And what you're saying, what you are trying to do is the trademark office wants to see if the marketplace recognizes you, that name, or that series as a good that you have out there. It's like saying, a trademark is saying, this is what I have created and this is what I am selling. Kind of like Nike. Like if there's a knockoff Nike and they use their trademark, they want that taken away because they don't want those knockoffs affiliated.
So within that, like I've seen authors who have a big name and a series that's well known, and then people are starting to, they'll put out t-shirts that say, use a quote or use a, do something from that series that's really well known and start selling that. Can that author do anything about that by getting a trademark, or is that just?
Yeah, so a lot of times, and I've seen a lot of these, and you might want to check, a lot of authors are entering into licensing deals. Right. So I have a number of clients who have entered into licensing deals with different people, say that are on Etsy that are selling products.
Okay.
Technically, if you were an author and somebody was using something that you had trademarked or that was yours, you could send them a cease and desist or a takedown notice. There have been times where we have sent a cease and desist, but if you would like to continue selling these items, my client is open to entering into a licensing deal for you to continue selling them. By the way, here is the licensing agreement that you can enter into so that you can keep selling it, and my client will receive a certain part of the profits that you receive, right?
Okay.
That's a really nice way. It has been my experience that there are some people, say on Etsy, that may not know that they're infringing, right? They're fans and they love it and they want to spread the love. There are other people that do know, but there are some that don't.
Okay.
So
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't anything to do with me. It was just I happened to see it happening in a
Yeah.
author group, like it was one of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what other things do you work on for authors? Is there anything else aside from those contracts and things? Like what else? What else can we come to you for?
Yeah, right. So I get lots of emails about, have you heard about this? Or do you know about this entity? Or what do you know about, because I do sit in this really great seat of being able to see publishing and seeing film and TV, and also having a lot of author friends who work in different parts of the industry. And so, and I love that. I love being able to say, oh, I do know this company, or I've never heard of that company. Doesn't mean it's not a good company. I just don't know who that is yet. So I think sometimes I'm a little bit of a resource, which I'm happy to be. I love that. I love being helpful that way. Answering questions about different sorts of things. I think sometimes, look, especially indie authors, a lot of indie authors are really smart about being able to negotiate, especially the advances and royalties and things like that with regards to their deals, because they've already seen it for other books that they have, if they have a big backlist. But sometimes they'll reach out and say, hey, have you seen any sort of new deal from this vendor, or for, what is the parameter that you're seeing? And if it's a former client, I'm happy to say, oh, this is what I'm seeing from them, because it's well within what we can do. So I like being a resource. I love film and TV, publishing deals, foreign rights. We do a lot of foreign rights deals for clients, and we've started to seek those out on behalf of clients, as well as not just being the entity that negotiates the deals for them, and redlines the deal. What else is there? Apps. Almost, I feel like there's, I could be wrong, I don't want to overstate, but I feel like everything kind of eventually, every new thing kind of eventually works its way to my desk,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Oh,
With
that's cool, though.
regard
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do a lot of authors go for print deals rather than ebook, or is there any of that going on? Because ebook's
Yeah.
such a lucrative.
There
for an
was
author.
a window at the very beginning where you saw print only deals, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the window kind of closed. But we've started to see more of those again. But it's so funny because some of those deals have a little bit of a sweetener to them. Let me give you an example. So I have a client who wanted a print deal, and the traditional publisher said, we will give you a print deal for this series that you've already published, but we also want you to give us a brand new book, and with that, the ebook rights.
Okay.
And it was worth it to her because
Yeah.
I think she thought of it as a loss leader. She thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to write this one book. I'm going to send it to them. I know that that book may not earn out, but the value of the print deal and being in stores for this other series that is highly lucrative then makes up for giving up this sort of solo book. You know,
Yeah.
so I think you have to kind of look at it strategically. And then we just did do it. We just did do a deal, and I can talk about it because it was in Publishers Marketplace, where we have 2 clients that have a really huge business as authors, and we were able to get them their own imprint. So they're going to be their own publishers, which will get, and they're going to go through Simon and Schuster. So they have their own imprint for all of their books, and eventually they start working with other authors as well.
Wow,
So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you know what's really awesome about that? There's a lot of creativity happening there. Like no one's just, at a certain point, it was like, no, this is the way we do it. Whereas it feels like there's a little bit more leeway.
I feel it's had to be, right? I feel like indie publishing has forced that a little bit open, hasn't it? You know?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But
I feel
that's
like
cool.
the only place that indie authors or publishers are still kind of chipping away is distribution into big box stores, right? Like it's tough as far as Target, Walmart, Costco. That's for us. You guys have some of those, right? Like you have Target.
Yeah. We don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Walmart,
it's still sort of an area, or even the bookstores, right? Like it's still sort of an area that can be challenging to get your books into. The stores.
Okay.
So many things to think about. Wow, thank you so much. It's been awesome. Yeah.
My mind is blown.
I'm so grateful. Thank you for listening to all the stuff.
No,
like
it's very cool.
Yeah, it's a wonderland to us because it's
Is there anything, if you were going to give sort of one last piece of advice to our listeners around this kind of thing, what would you say? Like what's the most important thing to remember?
Yes. So read your agreement. And if you don't want to read your agreement, find someone else, maybe even an author, to read your agreement, to make sure you understand what rights to your work you're actually conveying to another party.
Yeah.
Right? That's because the rights are so valuable, and you just want to make sure that you're not giving more than that party needs to be able to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Wow. That's so true.
That's
right?
it in a nutshell, right? That's it in a nutshell. We work so hard on all our books. The thought of giving away that to someone for not what it should be. Well, thank you so much, Maggie.
It's been amazing.
It's been fantastic to chat to you. It's been really interesting. So if people wanted to find you, either your books or your Eufy legal services, where should they go?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's just maggiemarlegal.com. Yeah. And then I think I'm still up on Amazon. And then if anybody ever has questions or concerns, I'm happy. Just send an email. It's just maggie@maggiemarlegal.com. And if I don't know the answer, I'll try to find someone that does. So
Thank you so much.
That's lovely.
That's amazing.
That's lovely. And so who knows where we can be found? Cheryl?
I don't know. Are we the Spar Girls? We are.
We are the Spar Girls, and the Spar Girls can be found everywhere on all platforms, and we're also on Patreon if you'd like to buy us a coffee or indeed ask us for some time. We can arrange that with you. Otherwise, it's spagirlspodcast.com everywhere.
Awesome. Thank you, Cher, and thank you, Maggie,
Thank
for a
you.
fantastic session. And thank you to all of our listeners. We're so grateful to all of you for joining us for another episode of the Spagirls podcast. We'll be back again next week, but for now, farewell.
Bye.
Bye.
Keep well. Bye.